Everyone knows Moses parted the Red Sea. Everyone knows the 10 Commandments. But almost no one talks about Numbers chapter 12, the chapter where Moses married a black woman, and God himself had something to say about those who opposed it. Picture this. You're standing in the middle of the Israelite camp. Thousands of tents stretch in every direction. And somewhere among those tents, a whisper is spreading. Not about enemies, not about the wilderness, about Moses and the woman he chose. And what happened next, the way God responded, it's one of the most dramatic moments in the entire Torah. By the end of this video, you'll see why this ancient story still speaks directly to every conversation we're having today about identity, belonging, and who gets to decide your worth. Let's open the scrolls. Numbers chapter 12, verse 1. And I want you to hear every word. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. For he had married an Ethiopian woman. Now, stop right there. Notice what the text does. It names the reason first, because of the Ethiopian woman. Not because of a policy disagreement, not because of a leadership dispute, because of her, because of who she was. And then the text does something unusual. It repeats itself. For he had married an Ethiopian woman. Fact, stated twice in a single verse. In Hebrew, that kind of repetition is never accidental. The writer is saying, pay attention to this. This is the issue. The word here, in the original Hebrew, is Kushit. It doesn't just mean Ethiopia. It means a woman from Kush, the ancient kingdom south of Egypt. And here's where it gets fascinating. For 2,000 years, scholars have debated who this woman was. Some, like the great Rabbi Rashi, argued that Kushit was a metaphor, that just as a Kushite stands out because of their skin, Zipporah stood out because of her exceptional beauty. In this reading, the woman isn't new, she's Moses' first wife, described in a striking new way. But other scholars, including the Jewish historian Josephus, believed this was a second wife, a princess named Tharbis from the Kingdom of Kush, whom Moses married decades earlier during a military campaign. Ethiopia. And there's a third possibility. In Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 7, the prophet mentions Cushan, right alongside the curtains of Midian, suggesting that Cushite and Midianite territories overlapped. But here's what none of them change, whatever her origin. The text calls her Kushit, and that word, that identity, is what triggered the confrontation. Now, I want to be clear. As students of history and scripture, this isn't about picking sides in a modern debate. This is about understanding what the text says, what the ancient world looked like, and why this moment mattered enough to be preserved for 3,000 years. Let's keep reading. And they said, Hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? You see what just happened. The complaint starts with the Kushite woman, but it pivots immediately to power. Has God only spoken through Moses? Miriam and Aaron aren't just uncomfortable with the marriage. They're using it as leverage to challenge Moses' leadership. The woman is the spark. Power is the fire. And then verse 3, one of the most quietly devastating lines in all of Scripture. Now the man Moses was very meek, above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. Moses doesn't defend himself. He doesn't argue. He doesn't even respond. The meekest man on earth just stands there. But God does. Verses 4 through 9. God calls all three to the tent of meeting. He descends in a pillar of cloud. He summons Miriam and Aaron forward. Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all mine house. With him will I speak mouth to mouth, and the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Wherefore then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And then the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And when the cloud lifted from the tent, Miriam was leprous, white as snow, white as snow. The woman who spoke against a Cushite was herself changed. And what that means, what it reveals about God's view of identity and prejudice, is something we can only understand by looking at who the Cushites really were. Who the Cushites really were. Because the Cushites weren't a minor tribe. They weren't wandering nomads. To understand Numbers 12, you have to understand Cush. And to understand Cush, you have to go all the way back to the beginning, to the Table of Nations. Genesis chapter 10, verse 6. And the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mizraim, and Phut, and Canaan. Cush, the firstborn of Ham, named before Egypt, before Canaan, before every other nation descended from that line. In the biblical genealogy, Cush isn't a footnote. He's the firstborn. And his descendants built one of the most powerful civilizations the ancient world had ever seen. The Kingdom of Kush wasn't just south of Egypt. It was Egypt's rival, its trading partner, and for nearly a century, its ruler. Archaeologists call them the Nubian dynasty. Historians call them the 25th dynasty. But many scholars now refer to them by a name that speaks for itself, the Black Pharaohs. Around 747 BC, a Kushite king named Kashta marched north from his capital at Napata. Egypt was fractured rival warlords, competing dynasties, political chaos. Kashta didn't just conquer, and he was only the beginning. His successor, Pa, carried the conquest to the Nile Delta. He created an empire stretching from the sixth cataract of the Nile all the way to the Mediterranean. That's over 2,000 miles of river, desert, and civilization under one crown, a Kushite crown. And then came Taharqa, if you know one name from this dynasty. It should be his under Taharqa. The Nile Valley Empire reached a size it hadn't seen since the New Kingdom. He built and restored temples across Egypt, at Memphis, at Karnak, at Jebel Barkal. He revived artistic traditions that had been dormant for centuries. The famous column of Taharqa at Karnak. Today, one remaining pillar out of 10. A witness to what Kush accomplished. And here's a detail most people completely miss. The Kushites didn't just rule Egypt, they restored it. When they arrived, Egyptian religion, art, and architecture were in decline. The Kushite pharaohs brought them back. They looked back to the great ages of Egypt, the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom. We will bring this back. They built pyramids, the first widespread pyramid construction in 1,000 years. So ask yourself, does that sound like a minor tribe? Does that sound like a people Moses would have needed to lower himself to marry into? See it with me for just a moment. You're standing in the desert. The sand stretches in every direction. And rising out of that sand, not 5, not 10, but over 200 pyramids. Steeper than the ones at Giza, smaller, but packed tightly together. But packed so tightly together that the skyline looks like the spine of some ancient creature. This is Meroe, the heart of Kush, and most people have never heard of it. The dynasty of the Black Pharaohs ruled from roughly 747 to 656 BC. Moses lived centuries earlier. Scholars generally place the Exodus around the 15th or 13th century BC. So the 25th dynasty came after Moses. But the civilization, the Kingdom of Kush itself, predates Moses. in Moses' time. Kerma, the earliest Kushite capital, dates back to around 2000 BC. By the time Moses walked the earth, Kush had already been a regional power for hundreds of years. Regional power for hundreds of years. And this is where an extraordinary story enters the record. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, preserves a tradition about Moses that isn't in the Bible itself, but that many scholars believe is connected to Numbers 12. According to Josephus, before Moses fled Egypt, before he ever met Zipporah in Midian, he led an Egyptian military campaign against the Kingdom of Kush. He was a prince of Egypt at the time, raised in Pharaoh's palace, trained in warfare. The campaign brought him to the walls of a royal Kushite city, and it was there, watching from the ramparts, that a princess named Tharbis saw him. She watched him lead armies with courage and strategy. She fell in love, and she sent her most trusted servants to propose marriage. Moses accepted on the condition that she surrender the city. She did, and he married her. Now, is this history or legend Josephus drew from traditions that were already old in his time? The story also appears in ancient sources, in the ancient book of Yashar and other rabbinic sources. We can't verify every detail. But what we can say is this: the tradition of Moses marrying a Kushite woman was so well known, so deeply embedded in Jewish memory, that multiple sources across centuries preserved it. And when Numbers 12 opens with the words, "because of the Kushite woman whom he had married," for readers who knew this tradition, those words carried enormous weight. This wasn't a scandalous alliance, a marriage between the liberator of Israel and a princess of one of the most powerful empires. Remember what we said at the beginning. Almost no one talks about Numbers 12. Now you're starting to see why. Because this chapter doesn't just tell us about a family argument. It tells us about a civilization, about power, about the kind of woman Moses chose. God who defended that choice. So now you know who the Kushites were. You know their power. You know their pyramids, their pharaohs, their legacy. But here's the part that will make you sit down. When we go back to Numbers 12 and lay the history over the text, when we look at what God actually did to Miriam, and how he did it, you'll see a pattern so striking that 2,000 years of scholars have struggled to explain it as coincidence. Now let's do something most Bible studies never do. Let's overlay the history onto the text. We've studied the passage. We've studied the civilization. Now let's put them side by side, and watch what emerges. The first parallel, the power of a label. The text says Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Kushite woman, not because of a policy disagreement, because of the Kushite woman. The ethnic label comes first. It is the complaint. Now here's what's remarkable. Throughout the ancient world and throughout history, the pattern repeats. When someone wants to challenge a relationship, a leadership, a belonging, they start with a label. They name the difference. They make the outsider visible. The text functions exactly the way identity markers have always functioned, not as a description, but as a weapon. Is Kushit doesn't mean she is from Kush. It means she is not one of us. Have noted this pattern. The label doesn't describe, it excludes. Now I need you to really pay attention, because the second parallel is the one that stopped me in my tracks. The divine reversal. Miriam spoke against Moses because of the Kushite woman, a woman whose identity was marked by her skin. And God's response, he struck Miriam with zarath, a skin condition that turned her skin white. Read that again. The woman who objected to dark skin was turned white. Close your eyes for just a second. The cloud has just lifted. The voice of God, the voice that spoke face to face with Moses, that parted seas and shook mountains, has just fallen silent. And Miriam looks down at her hands, completely white. And Aaron turns and sees her. And he knows. Immediately, he knows. Now, many scholars are careful to note that we shouldn't reduce this to a simple racial parallel. Zarath in the Hebrew Bible is consistently associated with sin, particularly the sin of Lashon Hara, malicious speech. The Talmud lists 7 causes for Zarath, and malicious gossip is the first. God wasn't making a statement about skin color. He was making a statement about the tongue, but the irony is unmistakable. Scholar after scholar has observed it. The punishment mirrors the prejudice. Miriam used an identity marker skin to challenge her brother's marriage, and God responded by changing hers, not with darkness, with whiteness, with visible, undeniable, public consequence. And this brings us to the third parallel, the one I believe is the most important. God's silence on the marriage itself. Go back and read the entire passage. Every word. God summons all 3 to the tent. He speaks directly to Miriam and Aaron. He defends Moses' unique relationship with him. He asks, "Wherefore then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" He departs in anger. He strikes Miriam, but at no point. Not one single verse does God say the marriage was wrong. He doesn't say Moses shouldn't have married a Cushite. He doesn't say this union was a mistake. He doesn't say she needs to convert first. He doesn't address the marriage at all. He addresses the attack on the marriage. And here's what changes everything when you put the text and the history together. Miriam wasn't criticizing Moses for marrying beneath him. If the Kushite woman was the princess Tharbis, then Moses married a princess of one of the most powerful empires on earth. She was Zipporah, called Kushite because of Midian's connection to Kush. Then she was the woman who saved Moses' life on the road to Egypt, who circumcised their son when Moses had failed to do it, who was the daughter of a priest. Either way, this was not a woman who diminished Moses. This was a woman of strength, heritage, and standing. And the objection to her wasn't theological, it was personal. It was about who belongs and who doesn't. And God's answer was not a debate. It was a disease, immediate, visible, unarguable. It's not a God who tolerates prejudice quietly, in the flesh. But there's one more detail in this story that almost everyone misses. And it's not about Miriam. It's not about the Kushite woman. It's about Moses. After she challenged his marriage, questioned his authority, used his wife's identity as a weapon, what did Moses do? He prayed for her. Verse 13, "And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, Heal her now, O God, I beseech thee." The man who was attacked begged God to heal his attacker. Attacked, begged God to heal his attacker. And the real question isn't whether this was proportional. The real question is, what does this tell us about the kind of faith that survives prejudice? Let's pull back for a moment. We've looked at the word. We've looked at the history. We've seen the pattern, the label, the reversal, the silence of God on the marriage, and the thunder of God on the prejudice. But what does this mean? Not as a history lesson, not as a Bible trivia question. What does Numbers 12 actually say to someone watching this right now? Here's what I see. First, Miriam wasn't a villain. She was a prophetess. She led the women of Israel in song after the Red Sea crossing. She watched over baby Moses in the basket. She was one of the 3 pillars of Israel's leadership. And even she fell into it. Even she looked at someone and saw the label before the person. That's not a statement about Miriam being uniquely flawed. That's a statement about all of us. If a prophetess of Israel, a woman who had witnessed the 10 plagues, who had danced on the shores of the sea, could still reduce another woman to an ethnic category, no one is immune. No one gets to say, "I would never." And this is the part that hits me personally. Moses prayed for Miriam, not after a week of processing, not after she apologized. The text says he cried out to God immediately. Heal her now, in the middle of the pain, before justice had even been fully served. What kind of faith does that take? What kind of person absorbs an attack on their family, on their wife, and responds not with vindication, but with intercession? The text told us in verse 3, Moses was very meek, above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. It's strength that doesn't need to prove itself. It's the man who could have called down fire, but instead called down healing. God healed Miriam. 7 days outside the camp, 7 days of consequence, and then restoration. Not exile, not permanent punishment, restoration. The entire nation of Israel, hundreds of thousands of people, waited 7 days for Miriam. They did not march. They waited until she was brought back in. A community where judgment and grace walk together, where consequences are real, but so is mercy. Where you can be wrong, face the truth of it, and still come home. At the beginning of this video, I said almost no one talks about Numbers chapter 12. And now you know why it deserves to be heard. Because this isn't just a story about Moses and his wife. This is a story about what happens when someone is reduced to a label, and God steps in and says, no, no debate, no committee, no compromise, just no. And if you're someone who has ever been told by a system, by a community, by someone in your own family that you don't belong because of where you come from, or what you look like, or who your people are, this chapter was written for you. 3,000 years ago, God made his position clear. He doesn't see the label, he sees the person. And when someone uses your identity to disqualify you, he doesn't stay quiet. Before you go, I want to pray over you. Lord, I pray for every person hearing this right now, wherever they are on a long drive, lying in bed, standing in a kitchen with this playing in the background. I pray you meet them exactly where they are. We walked through Numbers 12 today, words written in the wilderness about a woman whose name we don't even know. But you knew her. You knew her face. And when the people closest to her husband tried to use who she was against her, you did not hesitate. So I pray for anyone watching who has been made to feel like they are too much of something or not enough of something to belong. I pray they hear what you said in that desert, not in a whisper, in thunder, in cloud, in consequence. You see them, you know their name, and what anyone else has labeled them does not stick in your presence. Give us the courage of Moses to love across every line. Give us the honesty to see where we have been Miriam. And give us the grace that even Miriam received in your name. Amen. If this story opened your eyes to something you hadn't seen before, hit subscribe and the bell. There's a lot more in these scrolls, and we're just getting started. And I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments which part of this story hit you the hardest. Was it the word Kushit, the reversal? Moses praying for Miriam? I read every single comment. Let me know. The next time on Scrolls of Fire, we're going somewhere unexpected. There's a verse in Ezekiel that mentions a name most people skip right over. A name connected to ancient gold, distant shores, and a question that has puzzled scholars for centuries. What if the Bible knew about places we thought it had never mentioned next week? Don't miss it.